Hello, good morning. So before we start, I have been asked to make a public service announcement for you all. If you have paid for parking today, please get that reimbursed. You're eligible for free parking, so if you've paid for parking, please get that reimbursed. Another public service announcement, if anyone has the Stories for Climate Change book, please do return that to me or to Nabil if you see him anywhere. So that's announcement number 2. Thank you, but welcome back, everyone. Great to see a lot of faces still coming in. People eating can join in, settle down at your tables. Great, all right. Sorry, this ran ahead. Great. All right, so just some reminders on housekeeping for today. No laptops, like yesterday. Corina is somewhere in the audience. She'll see you. Trust me, she'll see you. And she's gonna wrap your wrist. So no laptops, please. No, please be present. No cell phones, no laptops. Please be present. Try and listen. We're going to have a very interactive synthesis of day one with the co-leads who've been involved in this programming, who had certain expectations. So we shall see if those expectations have been met, and if they have any hopes for day 2 and day 3. Beyond that, we shall, like you all were super keen yesterday, we shall start with, I'm sorry, we shall start with a networking prompt for the morning, just to get everyone awake and thinking about the day. If you've had breakfast, coffee, this should get you thinking. Talk to the person to the left of you. What was your light bulb moment from yesterday? I know a lot of you were keen to continue talking about insights last evening. At least people on my table wanted to continue that. But please go ahead and talk. I mean, it's open for everyone. All right, thank you. Can we raise our hands to let the other people know? We're done. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Can we come back? Thank you. Great. Lovely. Lovely to see so much chatter and so much enthusiasm. I hope you were sitting with people who weren't from your track. That way we get to learn more about other tracks. I, for one, have been feeling I don't know enough about the other tracks and would have loved to kind of learn more. So I hope we were exploring other tracks through the people we were sitting next to, living vicariously, right? With that, what we have planned for today, and I'm sorry again, what we have planned for today is our co-leads coming up and just talking about day one, what day one felt like, and what day 2 and 3 are going to be about. I'd like to invite the speakers. From track 1, we have Greg Collins. He is the Associate Vice President and the Resilience and International Research Professor at the Arizona at the Arizona Institute for Resilience, University of Arizona. Sorry, Greg. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, please, sure. From track 2, we have Joanna Satella. So the track 2 was the communities track, for those of you who need a reminder. Joannes is the executive director of the Africa Research and Impact Network. Track 3, which was the urban systems track, we have Beth Chitekwe-Betty. She is the acting managing director of SDI. Beth, welcome. For track 4, which is the social ecological systems track, we have Nadia Setas, who leads the ecosystem-based adaptation theme at CDKN. And for track 5, we have Luca Russo, who's the senior advisor at FAO. Thank you. Thank you all. And we also have Rohan, our artist in residence, who's going to get a cartoon made while we're talking. Rohan, can we have him on the screen, please?
Be careful what you say.
Hi, Rohan.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
Hi, great to see you. Thank you for being here and good afternoon. Great. All right, so Rohan will be around. He'll be making his sketch like he did yesterday. And we all loved it, so great. Thank you. And just to set some scene and set some context, we started out with provocations yesterday from Shehnaz, Dina, and Michael, and I'm going to use those provocations to probably provoke you into answering some of the questions. And we ended with a beautiful performance from the Field Band Foundation, which probably left a lovely mark on all of us. Their joy didn't need any capturing of evidence, right? So, yeah, so great. Welcome, all of you, firstly. Good morning. Lovely to see you. Maybe we'll start with you all, reflecting on what was your light bulb moment and share with everyone in the audience. Maybe we could start with you, Greg.
Yeah, fantastic. I guess my light bulb moment was there's been a huge broadening of the tent here. I've been involved with this at USAID since 2012, the sort of beginnings of resilience becoming this organizing, programmatic, analytic theme at USAID. There was a small group talking about a very specific set of circumstances in the Horn of Africa, in the drylands of the Sahel, very tight conversation around averting the need for humanitarian assistance. But over the years, as the problem set has grown, the community seeking to tackle it has grown. And I really am impressed by the way the GRP has pulled together diverse communities. This isn't a singular community, but it's communities coming together. Now that can be challenging in the sense that the narrative gets a little more muddy. The evidence and how we define evidence a little less clear. But I think it's incredibly important to have these broader convenings to hear new perspectives, even on what evidence is, let alone what the most compelling evidence is. So a great opportunity to bring a broader group together, get new ideas that go beyond the way I've been thinking about resilience myself. I still do, though, at the end of the day, and this is probably a hangover from my time as part of the leadership team at USAID, know that Dina Esposito needs a very specific evidence-based narrative, and I do think that narrative needs to be revisited. Just to be totally frank, when we started this work in the Horn of Africa and Sahel, we were talking about recurrent drought crisis. We were not talking about accelerating climate impacts, Ukraine war, COVID-19, 6 droughts in a row. So the goalposts have shifted. That's fine. But we need to do the service and equip Dina with data that allows people to see that progress is being made. We haven't made people resilient to all that. But as I was talking in Kenya with colleagues a few months ago, the question isn't, did people need food assistance or not? It's, did less people need less food later than before? And if we can answer that question and bring evidence to bear on that, I think the logical conclusion isn't resilience doesn't work, it's we've got to double down on resilience. So that's sort of my reflection from the day. Thanks,
Thank
Suchi.
you. Thank you. Johannes, what about you?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think for me it's just about how complex resilience is. And the fact that it appears that resilience means different things to different people. From yesterday, I think we had quite a number of interventions from different cadre of stakeholders. So we had the donors with the expectation, they use USAID in terms of what they want to report to the leadership, the political system. We are the private sector in terms of what is it that they expect in terms of very clear, purpose-driven sort of returns that are supportive to communities. But also we have the communities, which is becoming more complex, and it's becoming difficult, really, to understand at the community level what does resilience mean. Because there are many complexities that basically are manifesting at this level. I think Greg has highlighted some of these complexities, including conflicts, wars, and all that, livelihood issues. So there is a plethora of ways in which different people, different stakeholders, basically look at resilience. And for the resilience community in this room today, I think the big question is which pathway is the best. I know Karina yesterday said we don't have to define or have answers, but I think we need to begin to think critically in terms of where do we want to go? Because, people need answers. Communities need answers. Donors who are giving money, they need answers. When they invest in resilience, what is it that we can say as a resilient community, that we are going to deliver? So while there are all these pathways and complexities, and of course science has also conceptualized this idea as complex, messy, it is a big field, but what is the 1, 2, 3 things that we can say as a resilient community we are delivering in a way that can show that kind of progress? I think that is very critical. So in that messiness, I think in the next few days, I would like to really see some clear pathways in terms of progress, and of course trying to reflect a bit, what sorts of evidence are of priority. Is it at the community level? Is it for the private sector? Is it for the political class? Or do we need to ensure that we have a clear understanding of these tracks of evidence, and how do we bring them together? So I think we need to have some clear perspectives around that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Johannes. Beth, what did you think about yesterday? What was your light bulb moment?
Okay, so everyone has talked about the messiness. I like messy. So for me, it's just the amount of perspectives that are in this room, and the richness of the conversations. In our track, what really stood out for me was Eric's presentation around heat. I've always hated heat. I always say I'm one of those Africans that don't like the sun because I grew up with eczema. But he was able to really articulate the impact that heat is having in communities that we as SDI work in, and the impact of that on the outcomes of children. And I think we have talked about droughts, we have talked about floods. Heat is something that I had not personally sort of like thought through in terms of its impacts. And for communities that live in temporary housing, that is something that is very, very critical. But also the methodology around how people are measuring and how to ensure that you include everyone and you value the knowledge of everyone who is involved, including the communities. I think that came very clear in our track. And then also that communities are also even capable of analyzing that data and understanding what it means to them. So for me, that came, so if scientific knowledge that we are producing is not able to be understood by the basic person in terms of its impact, then it's not useful, because ultimately our funding partners, the humanitarian community may come to assist, but ultimately the defenders when there's a crisis are the local communities. So ultimately our evidence has to speak to their knowledge and their lived experiences.
Thank you. Nadia, what was your light bulb moment?
So I maybe didn't have a light bulb moment. It was more like a string of fairy lights of lots of things kind of blinking on and off. And I think what stood out for me is the use of arts and, multiple different forms of arts. I think yesterday we had such a lovely example of different snapshots. So we've got amazing graphic harvesting happening. We've got cartoonists. We had an incredible musical performance, which I think if you look at the organization and understand kind of how it collaborates and how it brings in different people, is a form of resilience. And I think it also shines a spotlight on what we need to start thinking about and measuring. And importantly, one of the key aspects for me about resilience is also hope. I think the only way that we can continue to be working is if we have hope for a better future. And I think so arts-based processes, also using it as a way to kind of create dialogues, but also as an output. So how do you use it to broker knowledge? How can you take conversations that are happening and create little illustrative snapshots and use that as evidence? And there's a group that ran processes. They did amazing work with coastal fisher communities. They weren't able to come to this forum, but they actually used the outcome of that process, which was a stitching and embroidery process, to take that to court. And that was used as evidence in a court case to support fisher rights. So I think we need to expand the way that we're thinking about what constitutes evidence. And for me, being involved in creative and arts-based processes allows multiple values to surface, multiple knowledge systems to be acknowledged, and importantly, it also creates opportunities for imagination, because we're not going to solve all of the problems that we need with a lot of the ways that we've been thinking about things. So it brings in imagination of these other futures and other worldviews and other values, and I think that's really, really important. So part of it is also around these opportunities to learn. I think people now have experienced the beauty that's happening around us, and maybe the next time they run a process, the next time they go to Congress, why not bring in a piece of art because people make decisions based on emotions, feelings, and I think we've been very good at taking feelings and emotions out of things that we measure, but ultimately that's what drives people to make decisions. So bringing that back into how we measure things, how we think about what we need to measure that counts for people, and asking people what they care about is a first step, and just bringing them around a creative process just brings life into conversation. So for me, that was really powerful, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it over the next couple of days.
Lovely. The role of the heart, brain, and the limbs aligned, I guess. Luca, what about you?
Okay, I am an old-timer in this business. In 2012, we had an expert consultation on resilience management with Greg, team. So we have been seeing a lot of things, no?
Yeah.
So my highlight was, and I put a tweet this morning, is because I was surprised how many people were here and the enthusiasm. So the tweet was, the resilience community is still alive and kicking, and for some very good reasons. That was my tweet of the morning, so I thought that was something important. Now, couple of things. I was in the track 5 discussion, so there are 2 or 3 things that I thought they were interesting and have some cross-cutting implication, and then I saw also some, let's call it challenges, no? So, very rich discussion, there is no doubt about this, a lot of things going on, and different perspectives. So this is something that came out of the discussion, and there are some commonalities, no? So for instance, I was in that track, and for sure, markets are important for resilience, are a source of resilience, that there is no doubt about it. There was a very interesting discussion around actors, because everyone says we have to understand the actor's perspective, no? And there are a couple of things which are super interesting. One is the tension between, or the trade-off between growth and resilience, no? The fact that people might be risk adverse and therefore not taking some development path that we expect, no? And then the different actors that they may have conflicting interests, no? The middlemen. Are the middlemen so bad or in any case are part of the system and the solution is not to cut the middlemen out, no? And then there was also some consensus about the kind of methods you use, no? And mixed method, that is something that people always promote, no? Quantitative and qualitative methods. So this is a bit now, the challenges. Michael from McCormick, is private sector, he said something that is very interesting to me. He said, if you can measure, you can explain, which is right. But my question, and I'm talking of the public sector, the public sector, despite this, I'm still not sure, and I see a disconnect between the analyst and the decision maker. So the point is, are we asking the right policy question in order to answer and to address the issues that Greg just, or not, no? If you start from the methods and you don't start from the policy question, then you might provide the wrong answer. For this, in FAO, I am the lead food crisis analyst, and we have statistics. From 2016 to 2022, the number of people facing food insecurity and require humanitarian assistance has basically doubled, even more than double. At the same time, you see that the level of external assistance to the food sector is more or less stable. 2022, there is a spike in humanitarian assistance because of Ukraine, but it's exceptional. It will come down, that's for sure. And only 4% of this humanitarian assistance goes to the agricultural sector. Here there is a bit of bias from a FAO. And the situation does not improve. The resources are not unlimited. So what are the kind of policy choice that we need to do? And I'm not sure that we are asking the right question on this. For instance, market system. Yesterday, the discussion around market resilience is super interesting. But is this the right focus, or we risk to miss the full picture? No? So, for instance, in my view, we should look more at the systemic issues. No, food system in my view, it will be the analysis, and then out of food system, then you can say, okay, if these are the food system, these are the areas which require attention. Can be market, can be value chain, anything. So, but the reality, the need to look this in a complex way. And then last point, knowledge gaps. There are still huge knowledge gaps. When you discuss, and I'm coming back to the areas I'm more interested in, where the people live, the most food insecure. These are fragile environments, extremely fragile environment. And we don't know what is going to happen 10 years from now. What is going to happen with pastoralists and so on. So what can you do in this fragile environment in terms of building resilience. The people living there, their vulnerabilities which are not common. Take, for instance, the issues of protracted displacement. There are over 50 million people at the moment that are displaced or refugees. In the Sahel, you have 8-9 million people who are protracted displaced for years and years and years. What do you do for these people? So what are the issues that you need to put forward? And lastly, despite all of these, and Greg mentioned it, conflict, climate change, economic downturn, systems continue to work and provide some services at all levels, also in the most fragile context. So can we learn from this and try to find some long-term solution for this? So that is my take of yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you. That provoked a few thoughts for me, and maybe I'll pick on the point that you raised around growth versus resilience, and Greg, I'll come back to you on that. It's an interesting trade-off. We think of an existing system which is growth-oriented. We think of resilience, which probably focuses on balance, which growth is kind of contradictory to. Is that something that came up? Is that a question that's driving resilience measurement? You as an expert and someone who's been around for so long in this field, would that be a tension that you see in the measurement space?
The measurement space, I'm not so sure. In the internal political dialogue within USAID, absolutely. From day one, resilience was seen as somehow competing with the growth agenda. The idea that we would take long-term development resources and put them into areas where we're seeing recurrent humanitarian crisis, places where we do humanitarian assistance, where we don't do development. So there was a long time tension between that, but my own perspective is it's a completely false dichotomy. If you're not taking on the challenges of areas of recurrent crisis, you're actually saddling yourself with the extraordinary costs of these recurrent crises. And I don't just mean the dollar costs, I mean lost lives and livelihoods, lost aspirations. Yes, absolutely, the year-on-year dollar cost of providing humanitarian assistance to the same people in the same places every few years. So I feel like we broke through that argument, but it's always in the background, and there's always a tension here. But I think we can actually approach it from a measurement perspective and think about how are we measuring the combination of resilience and growth. And I think that we often think about it in the sort of market systems perspective, but I think we can also look at it at an individual household level as well. And it was mentioned many times yesterday that the aim here isn't for people to bounce back to a prior state of vulnerability, but rather to bounce forward to a state of greater resilience, better adapted for an uncertain climate future. And so thinking about, it's one of the things I'm personally interested in now that I'm in academia and able to spend a little more time with my obsession on resilience measurement, is how do we take some of the principles of resilience measurement and tackle longer-term time horizons associated with climate adaptation, the uncertainties associated with climate adaptation. And it's a yet more challenging field. But just to circle back on a point here too around evidence, we can, in the context particularly of a donor briefing Congress context, get caught up in this, we want the quantified graph with the p-value and the r-squared to explain irrefutable evidence that we're making progress. What we've heard over the last day is a lot of suggestive evidence that could be pulled together in a very powerful way. And it's not just numbers, it's stories, it's the voices of communities, it's art. And you are absolutely right that a much more powerful way of communicating this is by bringing those types of evidence together. And so I think even on the resilience growth debate, there's room for that.
Great, thank you for that. Johannes, I'm going to put your question back to you from yesterday. I was lucky to be part of that session, and Johannes asked a very interesting question. What does community-led mean? And I don't think we heard answers which probably satisfied you, so I just wanted your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting perspective, because over the years we've been talking about community empowerment and resilience for communities. But clearly from the discussions yesterday, it's still very unclear in terms of really what qualifies to be community-led. And the question I asked yesterday, what's the difference? Where is the line between community-led and elsewhere-led? In a way that can basically tell us that an intervention or sort of a resilience pursuit is community-led. Because this is a narrative that is really very strong. Yes, we need to empower our communities. We need to ensure that they are resilient. But at the same time, where do you draw the line that, really the communities are part of that resilient, journey or intervention? And there are very many nuances to it, because one of the things that was, amazing to me is that in as much as we are passionate about the communities, for a long time communities remain disempowered, in a way that the question around to what extent can they contribute to their own resilience? What is the capacity of the communities to be able to understand the extent to which climate change impacts are manifesting within their context? How are they able to, tap into some of the existing opportunities that they can use basically to, be able to say, we are leading an intervention from the community perspective. So there's a mix-up in this situation. And I think one of the appreciation we need to have is that the word community is still very complex. And there are many, aspects related to it. One of my colleagues was just asking me a question that if I am a policy maker and I come from a particular community, do I qualify to be a member of that community? Can I position myself as a community person? Or where do I belong in this particular sense? And I think we need to clearly define some of these matrices in a way that qualify what we do. And I want to put a challenge to the community. Even this one is a community. We are here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So where is the community strength in whatever we are trying to do? How do we want to conceptualize the community idea when it comes to resilience? And in what ways can we really say that over the years of interventions in terms of adaptations and resilience, that communities have become better? How do we draw those particular lines? What matrices can we use to show that? Because I am getting relatively concerned that despite the many years of talking about resilience, we are here decades later still saying that it is a messy field. It is a complex field. And we are not really offering answers, especially to the different people, especially the communities we are talking about. And this is a major problem. I like the perspective of the private sector because they are very straight and focused and say, this is what we want for this type of community. If we invest this is what is going to come out. And I think for us, the resilient community, we are still stuck in, the many, complexities and the discussions that kind of make us not to move forward in terms of showing progress with regards to resilience. And one question I always ask, even as we think about how do we operationalize a community, how comes after many years of adaptation interventions in the so-called communities, we still find a lot of communities, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, who are still, worse off in terms of their resilience. They are becoming more vulnerable, that despite the interventions to enhance their resilience, despite the funds that have been put to support the resilience of these communities, today, there are many communities who are still very vulnerable to climate change. So this is the question that we need to operationalize. What do we mean? We, when we, promote resilience, we promote resilience for who? And these, stakeholders or people called the community, who are they? What progress are they making with regards to their resilience? So it's a wider matrix question in terms of trying to differentiate the different constellations of stakeholders in the resilience ecosystem and what are their interests in terms of the resilience journey. And I think it's part of what Greg is mentioning. How do we create a consolidated interpretation and understanding of resilience for the different tracks of stakeholders, different interests that serves, can be brought together in a much more inclusive and sort of progressive way.
Thank you. I guess it's a question of building common ground then. And Beth, I'll come to you on that, and I'll pick your brains on that. One of the aims of the urban track was to build that common ground between very complex city-level indicators and these voices from informal sector, from conflict, from informality. Was that something you saw in the sessions yesterday, or does the tension still exist, like Greg and Johannes were mentioning?
So no. Strangely enough, in our session, I think it was very clear that what is lacking is not so much that there's a tension between what, for instance, community knowledge or community collected data and what scientific evidence we have, but that those two systems have often not come together to add value to each other. I want to challenge Johannes. I feel that communities are self-defining.
Yeah.
No outsider should define them. And so really this issue about what is a community is, to me, a very academic pursuit. My sense is that it could be spatial, it could be because of an event, it could be because of ethnicity, it could be because of conflict, but communities can self-define. We are defining ourselves as a community because in one way or another, we're working in resilience. So I think the challenge is not defining what is a community, but seeing the opportunities to collaborate with knowledge systems that are often seen as lacking in sync. So for instance, like I never thought of art as a measure to demonstrate and to expand on the knowledge around resilience. But I go back to in our session, Joe's presentation and Eric's presentation around how people that are working with scientific systems and artificial intelligence who are doing this like overall like top looking at what is happening, and people who are collecting data around which are the hotspots for flooding in our neighborhood, or why are people moving from a drought ridden area into the city, and where are they going? Those systems can and should meet. And Eric's, I keep going back to Eric's presentation because what it did was it showed that you can use communities to document knowledge in their own communities and link it to artificial intelligence and modeling to present a more concise understanding of what is actually happening. So what he showed was the impact of it, but perhaps that very same method can be used to show the impact of any mitigatory measures that have been brought in to address that particular issue. So that would be my take. Yeah.
Thank you. That kind of triggers what Shehnaz was saying yesterday about the Sheikh and the interview with the Sheikh, where resilience probably didn't even have a meaning in a language. And Nadia, you have worked with complex systems, you've worked with social ecological systems. Is that something that kind of connects with or resonates with the work you're doing as a characteristic of the system rather than a definition that you need to drill down on? And would you want to reflect on that?
Sure, yeah, I love that intervention yesterday, just the power of stories and also the power of eavesdropping in to hear how other people are seeing systems. I had a wonderful conversation with the AV technician in our session, just to ask him, like, what did you think of that session? Just to hear about, you know, did any of it land? And we had the most amazing conversation. And I think that's something that struck me, is that we get attached to theories and concepts and measurements and ways of kind of seeing the world, instead of maybe listening and finding that common ground. So I think it is finding that common ground. And we can still work with complexity, we can hold that complexity, whatever it is, and still be practical. So I think something for me that stood out in our session yesterday as well was you can use theories and they can inform the way that you then, the tools that you use and the approaches that you use, that can get very practical. And I think the role of case studies in showing how theories, you know, how kind of theory meets action is really powerful. And all of us sitting here, in the way, we're brokers. So we're brokering information in a number of different ways. And I think that's really important and really powerful. And I think we'll probably broker all different types of information. And how do we get some of the science and technologies and AI to have a conversation with stories coming from the ground? And it takes different forms of capacities to be different types of brokers. And so sometimes you might need to broker kind of systems. And how do you work across scales? How do you broker different knowledge types? And there are amazing methodologies to use to bring people together. Again, moving towards evidence and thinking about how do you broker evidence? And I think you can take them into different fora. Conversations that you're having at a household level, you're still using evidence to make decisions. And so I think it really using the appropriate evidence at the appropriate scale. What I am, and I'm not sure if this was another question you were going to ask us around what we're still hoping for, and I think there's been lots of talk of transformation, and we know we need to bounce forward. So what can we start looking for in the systems that we work in that starts showing that transformative potential? What do we need to start thinking about, measuring, speaking about, building? And also we've got, I think, a lot of measurements. We can collect a lot of evidence on some of the symptoms of dysfunctional systems. So we can measure how many floods there are, how many droughts, how many people at risk, all those type of things. We can measure those quite well. But do we have indicators and metrics for measuring the deeper structural issues? So if we're implementing an action, can we show how power has shifted? Are there ways to do that? And are we bringing those into the ways that we measure our interventions? Because I think that's maybe something that we can spend a bit more time thinking about, because otherwise we're fixing problems, another extreme event happens, we're fixing that, but it's that deeper structural stuff that needs to happen, and it's not always at a community level. And so I think our lens is often working at the local level, but sometimes it's fixing some of the other kind of more structural issues that are happening sometimes in global levels. And so it would be really great to think as a community how we can start getting metrics and evidence for how those shifts are happening. And we can see them, and there are examples of those shifts happening, but maybe having that at the back of our mind when we think of the systems that we work in. And back to kind of being knowledge brokers, being transformation brokers, being art brokers, how do we create more fora like these? So peer-to-peer learning. I think the little light bulbs that I saw came out in our session, where when people were sharing their approaches, their stories, how could I use that in my context? Oh, okay, I can ask these questions. So how do we do more of this, but not, in different spaces and in different places and more often? And it's amazing that we've got technology to do that now, and we don't have to all physically gather. But I think that power in partnerships, and we don't all have to do everything, because we've got amazing resources here. I need to find out who Eric is. He sounds amazing. I'm coming to find you, Eric. But it's these partnerships that we can build. And so it's partnerships with artists, partnerships with community activists, partners with decision makers that hold kind of purse strings. And it's leveraging those and brokering those for collective action. So that was kind of when I was thinking of Shanaz telling us about eavesdropping on another conversation and using language. I think it's the role of all of us to translate some of that language that we use into appropriate ways of having conversations with people.
Thank you. That's great. Luca, I'll probably take a step back and probably go back to what you were saying about food systems being the larger systems that need to kind of be dealt with, the problem of our times maybe. We have a food systems session coming up in the cross-cutting set of sessions. Do you have any very specific provocations maybe for that session that maybe they can think of, or something that they can delve with?
Okay, let me say something about food system. My organization, I feel, we did something like 50 food system assessment in 50 different countries. And when you speak with my colleagues who have done, the other people from the investment center that are very well known because they work for the bank and things like this, the challenge there is that assessing food system is something relatively simple, but the big challenge is what do you do when you talk of fragile contexts. Fragile contexts where food systems are broken, where there are a number of shock and stress that hit the viability of food system. And there is a number of unanswered questions. No? And if you, from food system, you zoom in, for instance, to value chain, because that's one discussion that we have been having yesterday. There is a lot of knowledge on value chain, the rich value chain. We know a lot about how the cocoa value chain works, and the coffee value chain works. There is much less attention and knowledge about what I call poor people value chain. Which are so important for the context I'm talking about, but they are very little explored. And just thinking in a gender perspective also of the role of women in this value chain, not in terms of transformation, in terms of cells, something like this. Who cares about sorghum value chain? Very little. It's a poor crop. Despite this, a lot of people depend from this value chain. No? So to me, the point is try to, coming back to the policy question I had at the beginning, to move from a generic approach to food system to something which is specific to the issues we want to address.
Thank you. That's a challenge for the food systems session, I guess, thinking about the poor people value chains, as you put it, and a good segue into from the tracks to the cross-cutting sessions, I guess. Great. Next round of questions. Nadia, you answered yours. I was going to ask for the hopes. You answered yours.
I got more.
But
I have more.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. But I want to know what your expectations for day 2 and day 3 would be. And how do you think they will pan out? You've been involved in the programming. You've been, Greg, for you especially, because you've been involved with the ARM workshop and now this. And so it's been like a long journey for you through that period. And your involvement is much deeper in that sense. What's your expectation from day 2 and day 3?
Yeah, I mean, there's a much longer history dating back at least to the 2018 Resilience Evidence Forum that USAID held in Washington, but even prior to that, many meetings, many convenings. And I think for a number of people who've been at a lot of them, it's like, where's the through thread that pulls us all together? So I guess I'll issue a challenge instead of an expectation. And I don't mean this in a pejorative or negative sense at all. But as you sit in these sessions over the next few days and you hear people talking about resilience, because there's a lot of discussion going on and not all of us about resilience, but when you hear someone talking about resilience, however you define it, get your pencil ready. Then when you hear them actually utter evidence, write it down. And at the end of the conference, look at the evidence you have and think about your own resilience narrative that you're going to pull out of these 3 days. It's something I do often when I attend meetings. And I like to think I'm pretty good at constructing these evidence-based narratives. But one of my main conclusions from other day is Dina needs an evidence-based narrative, but it's going to be very different than the evidence-based narrative that Beth needs, that other people need. And so let's bring this convening, this opportunity to put resilience evidence on the table, different forms of evidence, whether it's stories or p-values and R-squares, and think about how you pull that together in a resilience, a coherent resilience narrative that makes sense to you and has you walk away with something tangible here? Because I think that's what we all want to do. And what would be interesting to see is how many of those actually begin to converge on one another and a coherent story that sort of transcends individual perspectives. So that's my challenge.
Great.
I honestly, it's not a negative. There's a broad conversation happening here, but really try and pinpoint that evidence and construct it.
Great. I think that brings us all into a very sharp focus. That's lovely. Maybe I'll put that out to all of you. One challenge and one hope, I guess. Johannes, your turn.
Yeah, but also just to assure my sister here that I believe in community. I'm a champion of communities. I just want their voice to be clearly heard, not to be lost in the many messiness that we are in. Thanks, Shushi. I think over the yesterday and perhaps part of today, there is already a lot of evidence that something is happening. There's a lot of interventions that have been shared. There's also a lot of evidence that people are planning to do something and the way they want to do the things that they need to do. But I think moving into the tail end of the conference, we would want to see some more discussions and evidence around what are the outcomes, what are the progress of some of the interventions that different stakeholders are involved in. I know there is a challenge always, because when I was in Bonn for the SB sessions, and when we were discussing around the global stocktake, one of the challenges that was coming out with regards to resilience was the lack of clarity in terms of impact and progress. And so there was a lot of the same stories. We are doing this, which is all great. I'm not saying it's bad, but as a community, let's think about what the progress, mean for us. How do we communicate that progress? How do we document that progress? It is not easy, I want to believe, but even in that scatteredness of things, even in that messiness, we need to begin to highlight what the resilient community is achieving over time. Because this is where we fail as a community. We talk a lot of great things, but we don't want to show that really, after all these talks and intervention, this is where we are headed. And I know we have to be inclusive. We have to appreciate the complexities associated with resilience, but we must make a conscious decision to see where are we going next, which steps are we taking, so that we are able to really qualify why we need investments in resilience. Because there's nothing we are going to do as a community without these investments. The community that my sister is very passionate about, that are continuously becoming vulnerable, they will only progress in terms of resilience if there are intentional investments that go to those communities. But for us to do that, we must begin to show results, and we must begin to show progress. And that is the challenge I put for the next 2 days. How do we show progress? How do we ensure that investment that USAID is putting in place, other donors are looking for Dina when she's going to defend resilience investment before members of parliament who just want to see numbers? How do we ensure that we help these great investments to show sort of results? So that for me would be very critical in the next sort of
And what's your hope?
Yeah?
What's your hope? One challenge, one hope, remember?
Or one challenge, one hope. One challenge is...
You gave your challenge, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I've given a challenge.
No more challenges.
I have more challenges, yeah. So,
Hope, hope.
So my hope, actually, I've given, my hope is that we can begin to talk more about progress and impacts. Thank you.
Thank you. That's right. So hope and challenge are probably the same for Johannes. Beth.
I'll start with an anecdote. We have as SDI, we have what we call our Know Your City data collection system. And this started purely because when communities went to, living in informal settlements and slums, went to the city and said, we don't have water, the city would ask them, how many are you? Because the city was not counting. So the communities started counting themselves. So my sense and my understanding from the interactions that I've had is we have the evidence of what is not working. That has not been a problem. The satellites are up there are showing us what the changes. How can we use my hope? How can we use those very same systems to show that the work that we are doing on the ground is changing? Because in the same way, my colleagues within the network collect this data and continuously go to the city and say, so last year there were so many slums, this year there are so many. Sadly, they are growing, so they are not reducing. But if we can, because that evidence, you can use it both ways, can't you? If there's evidence that there is the heating in informal settlements that is detrimental to people's health, if there is an intervention to address that, hopefully that same evidence can show how a change is happened. And I continuously put forward, like, there's enormous knowledge to understand these issues. It's complex, but those of us who are brokers, knowledge brokers, we can simplify it and ensure that we also understand the complex knowledge that exists in communities who are in the forefront of addressing these issues. So I'm actually quite happy with how this is going, because I feel like I'm getting both.
Great. I'm going to provoke you and ask you to challenge people as well.
Okay, so this was what I wrote yesterday. So my challenge is we need to work less in silos to harvest this knowledge from AI to community knowledge. So I wrote this yesterday, so perhaps that was a good reflection at the end.
So that's the challenge to all of us. Great, thank you. Nadia.
I'm going to be quick because I threw out a challenge earlier, but another challenge for everybody is, if you're not already, to maybe ask where nature is in your intervention, in your indicator, in your measurement, in your evidence, because I challenge you to find an example where nature doesn't exist. So there is a line that you will always draw to nature, and it's making sure that surfaces, because I think there's always an assumption that nature is just this other thing, it's the stock that we can use. But I think the whole track around social ecological systems is to show that connection and to make sure that features, because otherwise if you're not making it visible and you're not accounting for it, the chances are that it's an externality and you're actually damaging nature and not bringing that into some of your solutions. My hope is that the next time we convene and we have these conversations, everyone's able to bring a lovely, I think of it as like a meal, and we've got all these different ingredients, and what makes a meal delicious is lots of different tastes. And so we've got AI, and we've got community perspectives, and we've got numbers, and we've got words, and we've got images and songs and dances. So how can we tell that beautiful meal story? And I think, it's how do we bring those conversations together across all of the tracks, because I think there are connections, there are threads. We all need, we need food, we need markets, we need nature, we need each other. And so it's to how do we bring that together and show the evidence that bringing things together is powerful. And it'll be really interesting to hear the cross-cutting sessions, because I think that's when it starts getting into what are those essential elements to bring out in that meal that we're going to speak about later.
Thank you. Luca, what's your hope and your challenge?
I think there's an hope and a challenge that overlaps. and to me, the challenge is to be able to provide a coherent narrative of where we want to go. Because I work essentially on crisis, there is too many ups and downs in terms of policy attention to a particular aspect, no? 3 years ago it was COVID, so COVID was the major disaster. Then we have Ukraine, and we tend to forget what are the real root causes of the situation we are finding. You know, I had a couple of interviews when the Ukraine war started from Al Jazeera and others, and they were talking about the global food crisis caused by the Ukraine war. I said, sorry, this is the crisis is already on. It's not because of Ukraine war, and then Ukraine war is of course an aggravating factor, no? And so we always look at the shocks. We look at the drought, we look at the conflict, and so on, and we tend to forget that what is at the center of the food crisis is the rural marginalization of people, no? And the policies which are not conducive to address the need of the most marginal. No? So we tend not to look at the root cause, and we are taken away by the contingents of the moment. No? Let me just give one last example, because I think it was very interesting. You know, once I was in West Africa, and you know, I am an analyst, so I present all my graphs about the impact of conflict on the food security in West Africa. And then there was a policymaker, seasoned policymaker, and he said, you know, Luca, if you insist on saying that people are starving or in West Africa because of conflict, then policymaker in Burkina Faso, Mali will say, well, the solution is security. So let's invest in security rather than invest on the root causes, which is, again, the rural marginalization of poor people. So we really need to provide a coherent narrative, and for this we need the right evidence.
Thank you. That's great. And maybe one last round of questions, sorry. But could you re-advertise your sessions? Because people might have forgotten. People might want to join new sessions. Could you advertise your sessions in one line, please? One line only. We could start with Luca first and go around. Pitch.
I'm moving to another session this afternoon at 11. so, and it's about evidence, no? About panel data and the importance of providing evidence to building resilience. But
we see a drop in the market systems
track. No, but still, I know the people that are going to talk in the session around value chain and the market, and I know that we are going to talk about the who, and I think there is, for instance, colleagues that are going to talk about what matters for me, is the issues of what do you do with poor people value chain. There is, for a colleague from Wageningen that is going to talk about this. So I think it's something worth to listen to.
Great, thank you. Nadia, advertise your track.
So we're going to move from the what and the how of social ecological foundations for building resilience and look at the evidence users and producers. And so what type of evidence do they need in order to make sure that nature is not a forgotten element in how we build resilience?
Okay.
So our session is on informality, and we are a really fun group, and
compelling.
And you will see this conversation around how we reduce complexity to usable knowledge to create evidence. So the how session is going to be even more fun than we had yesterday. So please come.
Amazing. Johannes.
Yeah, I'm in the community track, and just to say that communities are the front line for climate change impact, but also for action. So we talked a lot yesterday about the issues they face and ways of supporting their resilience. Today, we will move forward to try and see what are some of the best ways to, ensure that they are more resilient. And I want to challenge the community in this house that all climate action is now leading to the communities back in the local areas where we come from. So come for us to collectively support this these people who need our
Thank you.
interventions. Thanks.
Greg.
We're going to talk about resilience. We're going to talk about evidence. And it's going to be a powerful session on the power of panel data and tracking households through time, the power of counterfactuals from a user and a producer perspective. And then we're going to have an extraordinary session on what I would say are sources of resilience that transcend sectors, things like social capital. So excellent programming that Sam Owilia and Lita LaRocque are going to present on economic inclusion and going beyond sectors and building people's confidence, their sense of self-efficacy. And Brad's going to contribute to that section with some really great insights from Mercy Corps on the role of migration as an adaptive strategy and a huge shift in, I think, people's thinking around that. Even within the context, I'm aware USAID issued a new programming or policy guidance on the role of migration as an adaptive strategy, some new thinking, new data, ripe for constructing a powerful resilience narrative.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Big round of applause for all of them, please. Thank you. We shall...
Thank you, Suchi.
You're welcome. And we shall give you a chance to see Rohan's cartoons from there. So if you want to head downstairs, yes, please. Yes. Thank you. And we have Rohan, who's online and should be...
Yes. Yes. I hope I'm audible to everyone and there are no glitches this time.
Yes, we can hear you.
Lovely. Okay. So without much ado, here's the first draft from a set of 4 that I've managed to prepare today. I had a lot of fun listening to the discussion, especially Greg's opening note about food security vis-a-vis climate resilience. So here's the first. I've only used Darfur as a representative example. It could be any war-ridden area of the world like Ukraine or other parts of Africa. There was a lot of talk about informality in the context of definitions that are globally standardized. So this is one based on that. And this is something inspired by what Beth said in response to a very lively argument with Johannes. And finally, thank you, Nadia, for bringing in art and making it such an important part of this conversation. That's it from me.
Lovely, and just food for thought maybe. That's also another beautiful way of sharing evidence, of sharing and making us laugh, I guess, and that's also evidence, of course. So yeah, great, thank you. And we'd like to call out the graphic harvesters. Please go speak to them if you want, if you have any insights, if you want to share anything that needs to go up on that board, and loving the work you're doing there. Thank you very much. It's beautiful. And finally, before we break for tea, or coffee, maybe, we have a change in rooms for the communities track. So the communities track, which was in room 11 yesterday, moves to Hall C, which is right next door. The rest of the rooms remain the same. I shall probably remind you, people and households track 1 in Hall D here. The urban track is in 7, meeting room 7. The SES track in room 8. And the markets track in room 9. So yeah, that's it from our side. Thank you very much and see you at, is it 11? Yeah, see you at 11. Thank you.
Yes, una berber se me se obeza.